Welcome to ETF Market Insights, the ultimate destination for Canadian DIY investors eager for the latest on ETFs and the economy. Join us every week for timely insights and actionable strategies, all brought to you by BMO ETFs and our experienced panelists. Don't forget to subscribe, and let's jump right into today's episode.
Welcome back to ETF Market Insights. I'm Erin Allen with BMO ETFs. In my role here as the host of this channel, I'm constantly looking for new topics to cover where we can provide insights and education to do-it-yourself investors. And these topics really do come from a number of sources. They come from people within the organization through the advisor or institutional channel. They come from news and social media, but more importantly, they come from you, the viewer. And you can comment below with any topics that you want to hear about, or send us a question on etfmarketinsights.com, and that'll come directly to me. But that's where today's topic came from, on sort of this Buy Canada theme that we're playing out. It came from you, from one of our viewers. So thank you so much to the individual that wrote me a note on the topic. I've also been seeing this topic trending, of course, in the news and socials as well. So that's what we're going to get into today. Before we get started, a quick reminder that we are not providing investment advice or recommendations. Today is all about information and education. And today I am welcoming back Kevin Prince, Managing Director and Head of ETF Distribution with BMO ETFs. Kevin, welcome back.
Thanks for having me again.
Good to have you. So we are seeing, I was recently at a restaurant and there were no US wines on the menu. We're also changing our consumer behaviors in the grocery store, buying Canadian strawberries. But what we're also seeing is a trend towards investors really considering this when it comes to their investments. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But Kevin, kick things off. There's sort of two ways that investors can think about this Buy Canada theme when it comes to their investments. Walk us through those different ways.
Oh, sure. There's kind of two key considerations. Before I do that, I want to quickly highlight, ETFs themselves, a Canadian invention nonetheless, and celebrating its 35th anniversary now. So very proud to be part of an industry that's first developed here in Canada. Be proud about that as their participants too. All right, let's get into it. You're actually right. There's a couple key considerations when you look at it. There's kind of two ways to look at, am I investing in a Canadian investment? Of course, first and foremost, the actual investment, right? So a lot of investors may say, well, hold on a sec. I'm going to look at making sure that the company I'm going to buy into is a Canadian listed company, for example. And sure, that's a consideration, absolutely. Some things to factor into that if that's your approach, and respect that. Think about the home country bias aspect. Most Canadians, as I looked it up recently, have about 50% of their portfolio already invested in Canada. So that gives you that kind of that home country bias already. And you're going to accelerate that by focusing purely on Canada. And of course, diversification is always a good thing to think about. On top of that, too, if you think about individual securities, too, there are dual listed securities, too, in Canada and the States, for that matter. So don't just look, for Canadian listed securities. Think about, or other U.S. listed securities too. Like, think about the fact they could be dual listed. And then on top of that, think about things too about economic impact, right? Like, there's companies in Canada that have a large economic impact in the United States. And I just look at the Canadian rails, for example, and see what they're participating in the States and the extent they do participate in the States. Then, last but not least, there's foreign affiliates that are very active here in Canada. I look at the auto industry as being that key part up there. And of course, we want to be some supportive of that too in Canada. Now, we're going to give you lots of examples of individual ETFs later on, but there's some considerations for you to think about if you want to focus on Canadian listed companies. Now, shifting gears, of course, you can also look at, as from an ETF perspective, looking at ETF companies in the marketplace. And then certainly to see, they're all charging a management fee. And where is that management fee going? Is it going, here in Canada, or is it going somewhere else? And we'll take a look at some examples of those in the near future. But that's certainly something you can easily look at. Of course, I'll highlight that BMO ETFs is part of a Canadian company, BMO Bank of Montreal, of course. And Bank of Montreal has been around for over 200 years in the lovely soil of Canada the whole time. Also, I'd highlight to take a look at what are they doing with the management fees? Are they supportive of the overall ecosystem here in Canada? Because we want to make sure this ecosystem of ETFs continues to grow going forward.
Okay, Kevin, let's dive a little bit more into overall ETFs in Canada. Let's look at the key players in the Canadian marketplace and where their headquarters truly are.
Perfect. You know what? I think it's kind of neat. Let's start looking at the US side first and foremost, because there's a lot of players in the States that actually operate in Canada, because it's a $10 trillion industry in the States. And you're going to see some of those larger players active in Canada. So, what are some of the largest players in the States? Certainly seen BlackRock slash iShares, Vanguard, State Street, and Invesco to name the top four. Now, you will see a number of those same names actually quite active here in Canada.
Mhm.
So, in Canada, of course, RBC and iShares partner together for a distribution agreement. And effectively, what that really says is that you're accessing, in some cases, a U.S. company's ETFs, right, iShares, or you're accessing the RBC products, but it's together in one distribution agreement. Then, if you take a look at BMO ETFs, we're the second largest provider here in Canada. We don't count for that. But if you look also from American perspective, there's Vanguard active in Canada. They're owned by Vanguard US. And then last but not least, there's a Global X, which is the fourth largest provider in Canada. I'll highlight that while they're active in the US, they're actually owned by a Korean company.
Yeah, I think that's a good overview to look at, how much of the assets are actually in those top 3 or 4 ETF providers, and then who from that piece of the pie is a Canadian corporation. So there's a lot more to consider, not just where a company is headquarters for sure. We don't want to be cute with that. There is a lot more that goes into partnering with an ETF provider. And BMO, as Kevin mentioned, we were one of the first ETF issuers in Canada, but I'm hoping, Kevin, you can dive a little bit deeper into our history and overview of our innovation in the ETF space.
I can tell you, I was there from the early days of BMO ETFs back in 2010. And I've had a chance to see the journey the whole way through of how the ETF industry has really developed here in Canada. And so proud to be part of that initial development of the industry and as it's cascaded to where it is today in size and scale. In fact, when I joined, it was about $400 million assets under management at BMO ETFs. And now sitting close to the $125 billion mark here in Canada. And really, we brought to the industry a couple of key things. And I think the key thing is when we launched way back when, a lot of people said, well, maybe a bank's not going to make it in this industry, low price, low cost industry. Certainly, we've been very passionate and very active in that space. But in addition, a lot of people said, well, you know what? We like that BMO joined the industry. It gives a lot of credibility in the industry. And I think the fact that we've become the second largest ETF company in Canada really is part reflective of our commitment and that credibility we brought to the industry. And we've been a very big active supporter of the overall ETF ecosystem too. So not just our own product, but support the overall ecosystem as it's growing and be a good participant across the board. And I think that one of the things we've done, part of the ecosystem I'm really proud of the most is kind of our focus on education from day one. Really, I think about the advisors we initially focused on. And I remember being out doing like 225 presentations in the first year, like really focus on education around exchange traded funds. But take a look at what we cascade to now. Discussions what you and your team do on a regular basis, Aaron, with ETF Market Insights and helping educate the broader overall investment public and around the benefit of ETFs. Very proud of what we've done for education. Then shifting beyond the education and support to the overall industry, some of the things we've done to help build better portfolios along the way, which is that commitment to the industry. Things like, bringing out factor-based ETFs to help build better portfolios. Because a lot of investors are looking at, maybe I don't want the broad market. Maybe I want to have a little less risk than the broad market. And so bringing out something like our ZLB, which is our BMO Low Volatility Canadian Equity ETF, really allowed investors to build portfolios a different way than they could before. Staying with that, a lot of investors looking for income. So something like our cover call banks ETF, ZWB, was a new way of building portfolios. Another one I want to quickly touch on too is tax efficiency coming from our discount bond ETF, ZDB, really giving investors a different way of accessing yield in cash flow too, for that matter, in the Canadian marketplace. And there's many more examples of how we help build better portfolios. I'm a modest Canadian. I'm not going to go too much more than that. But what I'm really highlighting the fact is that, from a Canadian provider in the marketplace, we've been very pleased about our participation in that. We have over 60 ETFs with a 10-year track record now, and some things that really are uniquely designed for Canadians and Canadian holders out there, meeting their needs from both the risk tolerance, but also talking about the taxation aspect too.
For sure. And I think one other thing that I would add to that is transparency and tools. I think we have one of the best websites, and that is where you're going to go and have to do your due diligence around ETFs. And we've also launched all those new tools that we've talked about endlessly on this channel, providing complete transparency into the Canadian ETF marketplace, not just providing you with a tool solution that covers BMO ETFs, but that covers everything, providing you the tools to make the decision. So lots of good
Actually,
reasons to go with BMO other than just us being in Canada, but that's a good one too.
one more quick shout out for you though, Aaron. ETF Market Insights just crossed 10,000 subscriptions last week, I think it was. So
Yep.
again, you're making a half decent impact on the educational aspect. And one more thing on top of that, we have a dedicated strategist for the Canadian marketplace. Really, again, helping people understand where to utilize these solutions inside their investment portfolios.
I want to go back to sort of the first question I asked you, Kevin, and the whole idea of investors moving their investments actually out of US companies and buying Canada. What are your general thoughts on that approach?
Well, certainly something you can consider. Now, if you're going to look at that, keep in mind a few key things. Number one, US remains an important player, right? And think about it from a diversification perspective, and it may be something you don't want to ignore in your portfolio. So from a diversification perspective, Canada represents 3% of the global economy, right? And so you effectively want to have some international holdings, and US is a generally a place that you may want to consider with inside your respective portfolio. I'll also highlight too, if you're looking at switching too, there's some key considerations outside of registered plans, taxes for that example too. So some things to think about if you're looking at switching into Canada. Now, if you're looking at buying Canadian ETFs, some key nice things about that. Of course, you can look underneath the holdings of generally most Canadian ETFs, list all of their holdings. You can certainly also take a look at getting benefits from buying a Canadian ETF, right? So if you think about when you normally go to buy an ETF, there's a cost to move from Canadian dollars to US dollars, currency conversion cost. If you're staying inside the Canadian ecosystem, effectively, you're mitigating that currency conversion cost. Much more effective way of looking at investing, put more money to work and more money on the way out. And on top of that, of course, too, from a Canadian perspective, US estate tax, T1135, things you get to mitigate too. So if you're looking at investing with inside Canada, there are some benefits, but seriously, some key considerations for you at the exact same time.
For sure. So, yeah, of course, the U.S. remains a very important part of the world, and still a lot of growth potential there. But we are seeing a lot of investors and our own ETF strategist talking about international markets a lot more as a way to diversify. So, talk to us a bit about some of the opportunities we see internationally and some of the ETFs investors can use to get exposure there.
Thanks, Aaron. Very good point. You can certainly pick an ETF that actually invests internationally out there. And we have a number of choices to choose from, as there's many in the Canadian ETF industry. For example, if you're looking at just taking at the MSCI EFI, which is the overall developed market, excluding the United States, right? You can pick tickers like ZDM or ZEA for that matter, hedged, unhedged. Even look if you want to participate in the emerging markets aspect out there, which is the BMO MSCI emerging markets, like a ticker ZEM. You can also look at country specific. There's things like a Europe for geographical region too. So lots of choices if you want to invest outside the United States and further diversify your portfolio. And one I'm going to highlight, which is interesting, plays inside today's market theme, is certainly look what happened in Germany last week. Is a big thrust into infrastructure. So if that's something somebody wants to look at too, guess what? There is an infrastructure ETF, global infrastructure ETF out there, ticker ZGI. One thing I'll highlight that too is interesting is that correlation, which is a movement relative to other securities, relative to fixed income, about 50, relative to equities, about 60. So really not that much correlated to equities, fixed income. So not only is it a way to diversify, your portfolio internationally, but it's also diversification relative to equities and fixed income at the same time.
Absolutely. It's a great exposure for times of uncertainty. We've seen that time and time again in the long-term track record of ZGI. Let's talk about investors who do want to maybe bulk up on their home country bias. Maybe they don't have a bias and they want to add a little bit of a bias. Who knows? But there are people who are definitely thinking we want more Canadian exposure. You mentioned ZLB, but what other options do investors have with BMO ETFs?
First, good news. A lot of the Canadian ETFs for fixed income are Canadian based. So fixed income is a really easy choice. For the most part, you barely have access to Canadian based companies. Check a look though, of course, but there's a lot of choices with fixed income. Then if you're thinking about the equity markets, you can start broad market. The TSX, S&P TSX Cap Composite, the BMO version of it, ticker ZCN for that. You can even go to just the 60 aspect. There's the top 60 companies in Canada. This is the BMO S&P TSX 60, that is, and that's ZIU for the ticker there. We did talk about ZLB already because that's a risk mitigation, but let's say you want to focus more now on a little more income from the marketplace. Looking for dividends. And don't forget you get the dividend gross up too out of that because you're investing in Canada. So ticker ZDV, that's the BMO Canadian Dividend ETF. Or if you want to get a little bit more income on top of that, or cash flow for that matter, ZWC is the BMO Canadian High Dividend Cover Call ETF. Now let's shift gears too. You can also look at sectors, because you can get a lot of sector-based ETFs in Canada. Things like utilities, the BMO Equate Utilities ETF, ZUT, or even Canadian banks, Equate Banks, which is ZEB for that matter. Last but not least, I'll quickly highlight gold's been a very popular theme, right? So while it's not an equity, it's certainly a diversifier, and I'm going to highlight that all of the gold in our ZGLD, that's Gold Bullion ETF, is held right here in the bank vaults itself.
Yep, physical gold is very big right now, and is really strong performance that you just can't argue with as a good portfolio diversifier. Awesome. Thank you so much, Kevin. That was great insights. And thanks to our viewers for watching today. Two ways you can sort of play that Buy Canada theme. And I think we covered that. Any questions, drop them in the comments below. And a reminder, if you have ideas for topics, go to etfmarketinsights.com. You can submit a question, comes directly to me, or just drop it in the comments below. Lastly, I did want to give our viewers a quick heads up or a save the date notification for our upcoming in-person DIY Investor Day that we're hosting in Toronto at the Toronto Stock Exchange on May 14th. So there's going to be more details if you subscribe to our newsletter coming through and a registration link in the coming weeks, but wanted to give a save the date. It's May 14th. It's a half day at the Toronto Stock Exchange. We'll open the markets. We'll have a number of different speakers, educational content, and a great option to network as well. So more to come on that. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks, Kevin, for being here. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of ETF Market Insights. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and sign up for alerts so you never miss our latest content. For more insights and to keep the conversation going, visit us at etfmarketinsights.com. Join our mailing list and explore a wealth of resources and tools designed just for ETF investors. Until next time, stay informed and empowered in your investing journey. This session is for informational purposes only. Any reference to a particular company or product is for illustrative purposes only and should not be considered as investment advice or a recommendation to buy or sell. Particular investment and/or trading strategies should be evaluated relative to the individual's investment objectives, and professional advice should be obtained with respect to your unique circumstances.